on ocean breath. The yoga tradition calls it Ujjayi Pranayama, which means the breath of ascension. And we kind of term from that when we practice this technique, it helps us ascend or transcend the troubles of our mind. It's a really balancing technique, and in many traditions it's used as a warming, a heating technique. For me, my relationship with it has always been different. I've always found it a very soothing, calming technique, one which draws my mind into a really inward space. And as a side note, it's the technique that I've used to get all of my 3 children to sleep when they were younger. Even when they were struggling, and their mum can testify to this, that I would hold them, I would bring them really close in, and I would create the sound of Ujjayi. Now, it may have been a coincidence that it worked pretty much every single time that we practiced it together, but there's also a little bit of a connection between this sound and the sounds that we are all aware of when we're in the womb. And if we had a soothing, protective time when we were in our mother's womb, then that relationship to those sounds helps us deregulate and calm and fall asleep. For me, ocean breath, Ujjayi Pranayama, the breath of ascension, has always had those kind of tender, softer notes to it. And that's how I use it when I teach. I use it as a means to help my students focus. Even when we're in very difficult and challenging practices, we can use Ujjayi to bring us back into that centered space, or even help us relax when we're in times of great challenge. This is how we find it, because it's really focused on creating a sound. And it's creating a sound by contracting, very gentle contraction at the lower part of the throat. Best way to find that sound is to first of all focus on the exhale. And imagine you're frosting up a mirror or a glass. In a moment we'll breathe in through the nose. Imagine you're frosting up a mirror or a glass and try to feel the moisture on the back of your hand. So I'm going to take my right hand up, breathe in through the nose, open the mouth, and then frost up the mirror or the glass. I'll do that again. Now, to create that sound, we have to work with the throat in a very specific way. Very gently contracts, restricts the flow of air, and then that sound comes forwards. Now, finding it on the inhale is a little more challenging, and that's why when we practice this technique, I always encourage students to have their eyes closed so they can really pay attention to the detail and the sensation of what part of their anatomy they're using. If we reverse the technique then to find the sound of the inhale, first of all with the mouth open, we will find this. We'll swallow a few times because it will make the throat very, very dry, and then we'll have another go. Now, let's put the two together. And I'm going to apologise immediately because you're going to hear my throat get drier and drier and drier. So make sure that you swallow a few times or even have a sip of water. Let's practice together. First of all with the mouth open. So we get the inhale there. Then the exhale. Again the inhale. And the exhale. Swallow a few times or have a few sips of water. Now, once we've found it with the mouth open, because it is more accessible to do that, it creates a greater audio, easier for our mind to find, the practice is finding that sound with the lips closed. One, because then the throat won't become dry, but also it draws your awareness inwards to a much smoother sound. The way in which I help students find this is to link it to the name, ocean breath. If like me, when you spent any time by the ocean when you was younger, your parents would often say, go and find a shell and listen to it and you can hear the ocean. Or you would go to the little gift shop that was by the beach and they'd be selling shells, and if you held them to your ear, you'd hear the shh. It's very similar to that sound. So in this context, we pretend our hands are those shells. We're going to rest our hands over our ears, and that means that the sound amplifies. It also means that we limit the sound from the external world. So with the lips sealed when the audio lowers, this is a way of again amplifying that sound so we can find it. So bring the hands up, let them act as your shells, seal the lips down, see if you can create that sound now with the lips sealed. Okay, perfect. Final thing to note is that when we call this ocean breath, it's like we've just said, it's really in connection to how the breath sounds. But importantly, it's more aligned with soothing waves of the ocean. If you can recall any time that you've walked by the beach as the tide goes out, and it makes a very specific sound as the water is drawn onto the beach, we get the and it kind of pauses for a moment, and then as it rushes back to the water, it's the so it's a really long and smooth sound. Often when we start practicing Ujjayi and ocean breath to begin with, we're so intent on making a louder and louder and louder sound that the breath becomes very forceful, and it's in, out, and it's forced. And that's really not it. The breath is really soft, quite gentle. And in fact, as the breath progresses and advances, the instruction is that the sound becomes quieter and quieter and quieter, longer and longer and longer, and not louder and louder and louder and shorter and shorter and shorter. It's a smooth sound, a soothing sound, just like those final few waves as the ocean goes out. A long, slow, soothing inhale, followed by a long, slow, soothing exhale. In the variation that I'm going to share with you, in relation and context to it being more soothing, I want you to try to extend the exhale. So the inhale is long and gentle, but the exhale is that extra little bit longer. If we can combine that with the sound, this starts to shift our nervous system and therefore our state of being more towards that parasympathetic tone, the rest and digest, the calm, centered, collected, relaxed zone. That's where we want to be for the majority of our practices. And for me, Ujjayi is the door that gets me into that zone.